And welcome back to the Women of Water Get Real virtual summit, where we are talking about what and why we are leaking women from the water career pipeline, how to stop those leaks and bring women back. And we have with us today two really fantastic women from American Society of Civil Engineers, Environment and Water Resources Institute. Marge Bedessem is the current president, and Shirley, in 4 months, she'll be handed off to become the next president. Marge and Shirley, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yes, greatly appreciate it, and glad to represent ourselves as individuals as well as our institute as part of ASCE.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking before we started about, my experiences at the very first professional conference that I went to was an ASCE water resources, what they call it, water congress or something before EWRI became a formal thing. Explain what EWRI is. I think some people are familiar with the ASCE because of the report card that gets reported in the news. You've done a great job of that. But what is EWRI within that?
So EWRI as an institute, we have over 22,000 members, mostly civil engineers, but also some other disciplines as well that are interested in environmental and water resource issues. But our organization is a kind of a subgroup, a specialty group within the much larger American Society of Civil Engineers, which is in the more 150,000 member range. And it's a great resource for people in our field, where we can connect with other people in our technical disciplines. And I have to say that for myself, I came into civil engineering kind of not directly, and I think that was not directly because I was interested in the environment and water. And was very revved up about seeing what I can do in that area as a profession. However, as a woman, no one talked to me about engineering. And frankly, I didn't know any engineers, and I had really no idea what they did. So I went into biological sciences, and then later on moved over to engineering. So being a scientist engineer, can talk to a lot of technical people, but that my particular set of skills, I'm a much better engineer than I was a biologist. And so it was interesting to me that no one suggested that to me earlier, but I think that had a lot to do with my gender, at the time, and my lack of familiarity with that as a potential field. But anyway, being in the Environmental and Water Resource Institute, you really can meet a lot of other women that are very directly interested in water resource issues and water quality and things that the general public are interested in, but now you have the technical expertise to do something about. Shirley, did you have well, and also one other thing as far as getting involved in something like EWRI, Shirley will tell you a little more about herself if I stop talking here. And she's our president-elect, and she came into it, I'm sure, through a little different route. But I have to say that I spent part of my career as a faculty member as well. Shirley is a faculty member, but that I credit the educational institution for putting a lot of value in professional service, because that I was doing that about 25 years ago, and that's how I first was encouraged to join an institute, because most businesses, don't really see that as, necessarily as viable a use of your time unless you're doing marketing or some such thing. But there's a lot of professional development that's really valuable there. And so the educational institutions tend to advance you in that direction, but it's something that probably all businesses should adopt, in my personal opinion. But I will pass on to Shirley and see what she thinks about that.
Yeah, and it is a lot easier to attend an event while you are still in school when it's like, $50 or something, as opposed to 1,000 or several hundred, once you get out of school. So it's a great way to hopefully some moral, kind of take into consideration those who are just starting, maybe have like a just out of school rate or something like that. But usually it's a pretty big jump. So
Well, yeah. Yeah, what I was going to say, I'll add on to that, Kat. That's a great point. Is that is also the second benefit of ASCE is that overall they are giving a year of membership to students who are members of the student chapters. They're giving them a year of membership free, and even the associate members. Some of this is going into an age tier structure in order to address that issue, which is a huge barrier, particularly now that companies are no longer paying for memberships. Is to really try to keep the price extremely affordable for younger members to stay involved. So I'll say my background coming at it is I actually did have an engineer. My father's an engineer. My mother was a history teacher, and so with a love of science. So my brother and I gender swapped. He's a history teacher, history and math teacher, and I'm the engineer. So I still am in education, like almost everybody in my family, which I swore I'd never do. But my background is chemical engineering. And so I knew I wasn't thrilled with what my dad was doing, because he would like draw a lot of structures and stuff on paper, and that's kind of cool, but not that cool. And then in college, I just really figured out I wanted to go the route of environmental health and safety. But when you interviewed for jobs as a chemical engineer, they're like, well, you have to put in your 5 or 10 years at the company before you can apply to that division. And so it's like, well, that's not really what I want to do. So I took a shortcut into a small consulting firm in Boston and decided I really wanted to go to Boston. I really wanted to do this. So I just picked up and moved. So that's kind of how I did it. And then when I went back to grad school, that's really, that was another one of those life lessons. Fortunately, I decided to go back to grad school about 3 weeks before the company I was with filed for bankruptcy. But the paycheck bouncing thing periodically kind of drove this idea that maybe it was time to move on from this company. But that this is, I went back to grad school and used that also. I decided to go back to grad school close to my elderly relatives who could use a family member close by. And then I swore I'd never teach. So they asked me if I'd teach a class. I took a class. I'm like, this is actually kind of nice. And so I've moved up through the ranks at Penn State Harrisburg. I'm the first woman to rise up through the ranks and achieve full professor, and I did it in our 50th anniversary year. 50, not 15. 50th anniversary in STEM. I mean, others had been rising up in other disciplines, but women were not getting through the pipeline in STEM, usually getting diverted into other aspects that were not going to be promotable. So a lot of service, a lot of obligations for service. And now I've risen to being department chair in addition to president-elect. So it's, it's kind of been a little bit of persistence. It's also been a huge amount of support from people. That it doesn't matter if you're a male or female. It's a level of support also that has to be there. There are certainly challenges with being a woman in this profession, a woman in engineering, but certainly, nobody makes it generally without having a strong support network.
Great.
So, and I will add to what Marge said about EWRI. Obviously, I was part of my first EWRI conference back in the early 2000s, not long after the Institute formed. What I like about it is the fact that we have conferences, and I'm more in the stormwater side. We have conferences, for example, we'll have one this summer where half the people that come do not belong to EWRI, and many of them are landscape architects. And so they have this outside part of that. And Kat, as I got to know you also through AWRA, the American Water Resources Association, I like those conferences, any of those where we can bring in people, and EWRI allows for membership from people who do not have an engineering degree. You can actually be directly a member of EWRI without having to be a member of ASCE, because we feel that as an institute, that having those people in our profession, in our network, and also as we are putting out guidance for our profession, having their perspectives into our guidance is critically important. In addition to, obviously, you know, if you're a member, you get a discount on the conference, things like that. So that's kind of my quick introduction and my plug for EWRI.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Interactions for us, because what we do is very multidisciplinary.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I mean, that's where I came in also, is a very multidisciplinary background. I don't know if you're familiar, I actually started out, I had been a government major at Dartmouth. You know, my parents didn't want me to do engineering because they're spending all this Ivy League money and they're not gonna, you know, girls don't do well in engineering, so not wasting their money on that. And you know, spent years doing campaigns and legislative offices and agencies, and then ended up in an environmental consulting firm. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. This is so hands-on. This is so you know, not just talking about problems, but actually getting in there and fixing them. And so I started going to school at night while I was still working. I was doing proposals. I was doing project management. I got my ASWAPer, you know, certification, was going out in the field every now and then. Had my steel toe boots, my Red Wings. But you know, eventually got to a point where I could finish an entire degree. I actually had been doing a lot of groundwater work, and I moved to North Carolina, where they had an environmental science and engineering program with an environmental management and policy over in city and regional planning that I didn't require an undergrad in engineering. So I was getting to that, and then I realized I could do an entire second bachelor's in geology in a year. 5 classes, 3 labs, 2, you know, back to back for 2 semesters, and then field camp. Finished that, then went out to Chapel Hill, but realized that, you know, to have an impact on policy, which I was still interested in, and to be in leadership, it really was the engineers in charge. You know, that the head of the utility is the city engineer, the head of the division of water resources is the state engineer, right? And they were still, you know, now it's kind of changing somewhat, and there's more general managers of the utilities that have, you know, MBAs or MPAs or what have you, but it was still that perception that had to be an engineer. So I went back again to NC State to get everything I needed for the EIT. Did not really have, I guess, the advising that, you know, of how important that BSCE was going to be. And I had actually enrolled full time, in part because they had a chapter of Alpha Omega Epsilon engineering sorority, and you know, when I went into statics and dynamics, and there was 100, you know, students in the class, and 10 women, and 8 of them sat together, and those were all the AOEs. So I was like, I need a little support here. But I ended up you know, going out to Colorado State for my PhD, and I had been told I could have done a senior design project at NC State, and they would have given me the BSCE. And now this is a little disturbing. I had tried to go back and look into going back to NC State or here in DC at UDC, and there's so many more requirements for the BSCE than there used to be, that I'd be looking at, you know, at least another couple of years, even if I could get credit for the classes that they would want me to get, you know, original syllabi from professors who were dead.
Yeah, well, we've had that challenge. We've had former students, alumni trying to get that through. I will say one other thing that is an interesting part of the background is that I interviewed in high school for one of those top 5 schools in engineering who will remain nameless. But the interview was an alumni and a local alumni. Because alumnus is the right way to put is the right singular version. But this alumnus said, which is when I immediately crossed them off my list, was that, well, women typically don't pass freshman physics, so you might as well go ahead and plan to take it a second time. And we don't know why. And it came across like, not only do we not know why, but we don't care. And that's, I think, given that I went through that, this was 82, 82, 83, as we were going through those interviews, that it still says a lot about some of the challenges that were out there. And, really how at times in certain parts of the profession, this has not been the most welcoming to women. Overall, it's not just the challenge of you or Marge not getting good advice. It's also sometimes, and we've all been through it, the openly hostile. And how I think it's gotten better.
When I was on faculty in civil engineering, I had, we had concerns about how we could retain women who had joined the engineering program, and tried to, had a lot of interviews trying to figure out what might be the problem, why they wouldn't stay. And I found, particularly with the students that I dealt with, when I had female students that were deciding to switch to a different career, even though, for example, they were very dedicated to trying to solve water pollution problems, a lot of it wasn't because they were not good at math or not getting something the way the rest, the other faculty assumed was the problem. They assumed that, well, they're not being successful, so they're switching, majors. But it turned out that many of our students were some of the best students. They were actually doing really well. And they were leaving to do other things. And one of the reasons was not that they weren't successful grades-wise, but they weren't as well motivated, I think, by competing with the person next to them, but it was more of the interaction with the faculty and that support and encouragement that, hey, yeah, you're gonna succeed in this field. This is gonna be good, and just giving that feedback and support was a little more important to their feeling successful in our particular major or area of technical expertise. And it was interesting. We were losing very, very good students. And so I'm hoping, since that has more to do with the culture and the encouragement, that improves as time goes on, and we keep more of those very excellent students.
Yeah, I mean, because I think there's a lot of focus on, we're almost at 50-50 in STEM, including like nursing and science education and stuff. And when we look at, there's that statistic a lot of people wave around about 40% of women, get engineering degrees and are gone within 10 years if they even start with an engineering career. And that MIT longitudinal study, this 13-year study, it was actually very detailed. If you really look at the study, that they had women keep diaries of some of the things that they were experiencing. And, you're in lab class or whatever, and they said, okay, you get to keep the notes. And then, since you wrote the notes, we're going to go play football and you can go write the report. And, it just wasn't, I know with me, I had had a professor when I discovered systems analysis in grad school. And I was like, oh my God, this is so me, because it's like, where I can bring in policy and legal and regulatory constraints and economic constraints and financial and biological and physical, and put it all in one model, right? And I thought it was just the coolest thing in the world. And I went and sat down with the systems professor. It's like, I'd love to go after a PhD in this. And explaining what I wanted to do, and to really that I'd had my little project for my master's, but I could really dig into something. And he just looks at me and goes, "Well, you should think carefully about a PhD, because it's a big time commitment, and you're a beautiful girl."
Wow.
Well, I'm sure anybody in these fields, has gone through, all sorts of bumps along the way. And so the objective is to not let it derail you, and to help other women that are going to be in that spot. If you're, a bystander to any of this, to be able to, say something and help that situation.
Right.
Those conversations don't happen in public, but to do the best we
It's a
can.
lot, yeah, it's a lot less.
Yeah,
And then people don't remember, people don't believe it when it happens. And there's a book
individuals.
Sorry.
Well, I'm saying by giving them a leg up, for example, and recognition.
Yeah.
So that so I don't know about I would have loved to have had a professor like Shirley when I was in college, that's for sure, as a great mentor. But even people in industry, if there's mentorships programs, try to get a mentor that's not only a mentor just for your technical area, but also for your work-life balance, and also how to deal with situations like you came across. And then to spend time recognizing other women and giving them a leg up. Like, I've been involved in EWRI for 25 years or so, have lots of wonderful relationships with people, but there are other women who really helped and said, hey, do you want to, would you be willing to be appointed to this position and step up and do that? And so trying to give each other opportunities and recognition for when we're doing a good job is really a wonderful thing you can do for your peers.
Well, and I had that, we talk about, hopefully it isn't happening that much. I had it happen last week. I was at a meeting, and there were three women in our breakout session, one of whom was very soft-spoken. And she started to make a point, and the breakout session chair actually talked over her. And that wasn't even one of the other people in the room. The breakout session chair talked over her. And once he got to a point where he's taking a breath, I'm like, and I'd like to return to the person's point, let her actually complete what she wanted to put into this breakout session group. Because again, she was, she started leaning back and leaning out of the conversation. Also, it's not just the issue of his being rude and not thinking about it. It was also, it's a fast way to turn people off. And that's part of where that challenge is, as Marge said, or you said, we've gotten since you took the notes, or as soon as you walk in a room, you're the only woman there. It's like, well, somebody needs to take notes, and all of a sudden all the eyes are on you. And I think a lot of women don't stand up and say, that's fine, I'll do it today, but I'm not doing it next time. This needs to rotate.
And people that are first coming into the field, it's harder for them to do that. So what we can do to help is, you really helped in that situation when she got talked over, because, I've heard many times of people having made a suggestion in a meeting and then find somebody else rephrase the same suggestion, and then all of a sudden now it's being heard. So if we can help those people be recognized for their contributions and giving them the space and time to give those contributions, is just, it's a good thing. And all of us have experienced when we haven't had people there to help us.
And there's some real challenges when we're in a profession like civil engineering or other water related professions that we talk about the apprentice years and your journeyman years and walk the tables, the associates and everything, but it's very there's a lot to reputational capital. There's a lot to other people, peer support and peer, not just supporting you to be able to make your point, but are you someone that people should work with or not? And there are times when that can be used against someone if they speak out of turn, or if they talk about things that make people uncomfortable. And we have, this event has been a tremendous turnout. 44 amazing women and one trans man. So we got a great turnout. But often, women who've been in the field for a long time and are secure in their leadership roles, and women who are younger. And in the middle, it can be a little challenging if someone is, on the verge of becoming an associate, or on the verge of getting tenure, or on the verge of, in those positions where people can really do a lot of harm if they, whether it's implicit or explicit. Women kind of silence themselves because they don't want to have their careers derailed.
And unfortunately, I think that we pay for that a lot harder as women. That because there are expectations put out there. Back when I was in undergrad, the last year, they ran a program called the Women's Leadership Training Institute. So please know this, we're talking 1986. So I will sit there and date it. But it was a wonderful program, and the group was only women leaders on campus. So there were no men in the group. So it was women learning about leadership. And in addition to the reminder from one of the university vice presidents, vice chancellor, whatever, who had written the book called The New Assertive Woman, who reminded us that men get called assertive, women get called aggressive for the same behavior. And there is a huge difference in that. One of the most interesting eye-opening exercises to me was one of the ones we did early in the program. And again, I do think some of that bias is still out there and it can be overcome, but it is hard. We were given 3 resumes, one with a very, at that time, obviously male name like John, one with a very female name, like it could have been, the name that sticks in my mind is Victoria, it may not have been. And then the same resume, the third group got with the name Pat. Is that short for Patrick or Patricia? And it was a very, every couple of years, the person had changed jobs and moved up into a new position. You could see a career pattern growth. And among the women leaders, so we were divided into 3 groups. Among the women leaders that got the male resume, the summary that came out was, he's a real go-getter. He's really ambitious. He's moving forward. The women who got the women's resume asked questions about how did she move up so fast. And I was in the group that had the Pat resume. And I remember the first question that came out of somebody's mouth in the group is that male or female? Which tells you how hard that social conditioning is.
Because it shouldn't matter.
So it is, and it's still out there. And again, when you invite us here, we were talking about leaky pipelines and some of the challenges, and you talked about an MIT study. That's happening way too young. It's happening before we get to college.
Right.
That is one of the challenges, and yet we've got an infrastructure and a world that's going to need every professional we can get our hands on. People are retiring faster than we can replace them, and with this huge emphasis and this huge investment in infrastructure, we need those people. We need good men and women, and people who do not identify with either gender to be working on solving these wicked challenges. So that's my action statement. Marge, I think you were talking.
The real need for diverse viewpoints, so that I'm sure it sounded like that whole experience was very
revealing.
Enlightening, yes, enlightening.
Revealing. Because here I was seriously, I was the head of the council that was running all the sports clubs on campus. And that was an elected position. I was elected by men and women. So I was not in a position, like here with Marge and I and EWRI. We were obviously not just elected by women. We were elected by men. We were supported by men. We were voted on by men, which says that we've got the skills and qualifications that they found were worth having invested in this organization. And yet, even that, I still had in the back of my mind, that question came up first. I didn't say it out loud, but it came up. And it just tells you the problem of social conditioning.
That although you and I were both elected by, our membership, which is, 75% men, the idea that we should join the leadership I felt promoted by other women to do so.
I was voted in by men. I mean, I was pushed by men.
Okay, well that's good.
I mean,
that's good.
And it's not, and I will say, it's not that it was that the women were not supportive, but the people who approached me about running were probably about 75% male.
So very, very reflective of the group that makes up the institute. Okay?
Yeah.
And for me, the fact that it was women may have more to do with the fact that the council, the technical group that I'm involved with at the institute is the Environmental Council, which for some reason is dramatically a majority of women. Not sure exactly why, because it's not necessarily reflected completely in the field, but within EWRI it is. So the group that I came from was primarily women, which is unusual. However, the leadership at EWRI right now is 75% women, 25% male. It's flip-flopped from the organization in general, which means that there's not a ceiling, there's encouragement, there's lots of opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to say, I came from the Urban Water Resources Research Council, which is heavily male. Because the research part of the profession has historically been heavily male. It probably is about 30% women. But that's where I came from. And actually, Marge, if I can build on your last comment, the next person behind me, our vice president, is a new faces of civil engineering woman, Jennifer Sloan Ziegler out of Mississippi, Cypress Engineering. And she also is very interested in seeing this happen. On the other end, I think that she's doing that I think is very interesting, and we're continue to look forward to her efforts, because her efforts have been amazing so far, has also been looking at development of young engineers and really looking at also those power skills that can help people get ahead. And again, it's not focused necessarily on women, although she is concerned about the women's pipeline. But she's a mother. She's a mother with a child at home. But yet she is still involved, which also shows that with the right company, you can have that kind of support for somebody. Motherhood is not a derailment in your profession.
Yeah. I think there are so many, you talked about the support you had from men, and there's a lot of great men, a lot of great support from men. I'm about to interview for the summit the author of this book, Hush Money, Jackie Abram, who it's how one woman proved systemic racism in her workplace and kept her job. And it is short, but every single chapter it took me a week to get through the first chapter, because it was she did such a great job of capturing, she and her daughters did such a great job of capturing those behind the scenes conversations. And it really, occurred to me that there's a difference, whether it's race or sex or, sexism, there's a difference between people who are just not aware, and you can tell your stories, and you can, show data, and, and people can change, and people who have deeply held beliefs about certain types of people, and will work the system, and it happened to be about someone who, the author had been in a university system, right, as in administration in the university system, and that, when a lot of civil engineering, it occurs in a lot of water programs occur in large organizations, and people can learn, figure out how to work the system and make it seem like, oh, we're going to do you a favor and let you take care of your mom, and we'll have someone else present your paper for you at the conference, those sorts of things. And it can really, you have to pay attention, and and try to figure out, is it just not being aware? Is it, thinking it's okay to make jokes or whatever? Or is it someone who was raised to believe things a certain way, that people, women need to be at home raising kids, and it's damaging to young children if their mothers are working. We actually had principals and associates tell me and the women I was managing in one office, and the women were like coming to my office crying, and it's like, they had young children at home, or they were pregnant, or were about to get married, and okay, you have to do something, and it can be really hard on those women who are in those in between positions, because they've gotten so far up, and there's so much more to lose if they're seen as the linchpin of the young person can say what they want, and they'll stay, they'll go, whatever. But someone who's invested a number of years and gets really close to getting tenure, or really close to getting an associate position, it can, it can just be a damper on whether you say something or you do say something, and then suddenly you find yourself without a career that you just invested so much of your life in.
Yeah, there was an interesting study I forget what it was a couple of years ago also, that the perception of the mommy track hurts women. They were talking about women in engineering, and they were at the same resume, the same internships, and same GPA, were getting offers at 96% of what men were. So that's not a horrible wage gap, but if you start low, you often stay low. And because the perception is that hiring a young woman, she's going to get married and she's going to want to step out of the workplace to be, and all of those things. We're going to have to give maternity leave. Thankfully, we're starting to see more progressive places going to parental leave and giving to both parents. But it's a society that's still trying to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the culture, everyone should be concerned about the culture of where they work, and to promote something that doesn't create those roadblocks for women. And I also encourage, women, not to be when they're picking a job, because hopefully they'll be in the picking the job frame of mind here. And looking at offers, to not be wowed by necessarily the dollar sign, but to really spend time figuring out whether the culture at the company, or even within their group or department, is really compatible with their viewpoints. And that just because a person might be on a mommy track, if they're, I'm in the consulting world now, if they're responsible about what their projects are, and wrap things up and hand things off appropriately, and don't assume that they can't go forward or be promoted, there's lots of opportunities. And so I would encourage people, for example, to if they're in a company that's big enough that they can apply for internal positions, where perhaps they may not be 100% ready for that position, but applying for it, and showing that you're interested in being ambitious, as opposed to, I'm more interested in 100% what's going on at home, and I'm not really engaged here. Even though you might not be the best candidate at the time, showing that interest and getting the experience of interviewing and learning how to do that when the time is right, where you come back from leave, or you come back from a period where you might be able to negotiate part-time work or half-time at home, because now we have all these great opportunities where you can do, visual, virtual meetings and so forth.
Yes.
Take advantage of those flexibilities and work for a company or an institution where those are options. And then, if there's some difficulties, get, promoted out of a group that doesn't have the right culture and so forth. But anyway, keep all those things in mind.
And Marge, I'll add to that. It was very interesting this week. I got an email, last week, I got an email from some listener, probably off of one of the Chesapeake Bay program organizations that accumulate job ads. And I just clicked on one. It wasn't in my field. It wasn't an engineering job, and it wasn't faculty. But I was just curious when I saw it go by, because it put specifically on there. It said women minorities often do not apply to a job unless they feel like they meet 100% of the qualifications. nobody meets 100% of the qualifications. We encourage everyone to apply. It was actually coming in and stating, we understand this, apply. We want a diverse pool of candidates. But the fact that they actually had it on the job advertisement, I thought was a very bold step and a very good step. And I had not seen it because a lot of it does. We do know that's what ends up happening. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really great comment, Shirley.
And one of the things that has come up, especially with talk to women who've headed water utilities and whatnot, is women who might have a somewhat less ambitious career until their kids get to high school or college or what have you, and then are willing to step into more of a leadership track and to make sure that you've got those opportunities to step into leadership. And that being on the mommy track doesn't mean mommy track for life, right? That and how do we create those opportunities? We've talked to a lot of folks during this summit. This is going to play on the last day of the Society for Women Engineer Career Reentry, the STEM Career Reentry Program, and there's legislation on that right now to bring it into the federal government. I relaunch, Path Forward, Untapped Potential. These programs that work with organizations to create these return to work cohorts, these kind of returnship type programs. And just to have a willingness to say, now someone who's ready to step in, and especially with so many people retiring, you're not going to replace a retiree with a new graduate, right? But you could bring in someone that has had experience, maybe has done some other things for a while, but is ready to come back in and brings that life experience, brings that perspective on the industry, that someone who's new and has a lot of book smarts and latest technologies from whatever was in the computer lab at school, but doesn't really understand, especially with, like you said, these wicked water problems. It's really complex, and you don't really see that unless you're in doing the projects, right?
And if you don't see it unless you've had a lot of experience, and that is where experience comes in. I think there's been a lot of work out there talking about helping people, whether it is, and we are seeing more men stepping out or more fathers, the second parent stepping out. I had a friend whose husband just went back into the workforce 2 days ago after raising the kids, got them both in elementary school. But it is that return into the system, but we are starting to see more thought process about, and also how you tailor the resume to explain all the managerial and organizational skills you continue to hone while you were out or while you were part-time, if you chose to go that direction. I see Marge is pointing at herself.
Yeah, I was a big advocate for, part-time and flexibility. However, one thing that I still think is great about being involved in professional organizations like EWRI is you may have to step back for a few years. It's really hard to make the case for getting that job when you return to the workforce if there's no indication that you are up to speed technically, or if you kept up with what's going on and so forth. And even if you're not working part-time, if you're in touch virtually through technical committees, through being involved in your profession, then that really speaks a lot for smoothing a re-entry into the workforce. So I would definitely advocate for that.
Fortunately, because I created this online education organization, I have been able to go to a number of professional events, as the water reporter, as the Wawa Mojo, be in the know with the Wawa Mojo, the water mobile journalist, and like watching the sessions and then immediately interviewing someone to get like the top 3 points or something like that. And the press is pretty much stay up to speed and stay on contacts as well as subject matter, new regulations and new innovative projects and technologies and things like that. But although it's hard, would be very hard to do that otherwise, because it's very expensive to go to these conferences if you're not there and you're not getting an employer paying for it. And a lot of women, when they hang their shingle, if they do consulting, they're barely getting paid. They're often getting paid a lot less as a consultant, or strung along or stuck on a contract, a proposal to get the contract, and then don't get what they're supposed to get. And guys, if they go out on their own, often they'll take an office in in an association, and that becomes their business card. That becomes how they can testify in cars, and that becomes their way to build up their practice, their consulting practice, and they can do very well. And I know a lot of women who, if they didn't have husbands paying health insurance, they they're just getting little drips and drops of contracts. And it's I see a lot of these people with the Great Resignation. It's like, do you know what you're in for? Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, these are some of the challenges.
Yeah. It's not easy to be an independent consultant, and I think women, as an independent, any sort of harassment issues, assault issues, whatever, all of those laws are written about under labor, with your employer. And so, you're, single woman at a conference, she's kind of a sitting duck sometimes. And it's just, hopefully she's, got the support, and that those things don't happen, but sometimes they do. And so I don't know if that's something people think about in terms of, if an incident happens, do organizations censor members, or do they, can someone lose a license for unethical behavior? I think that harassment counts as unethical behavior as much as, cooking the books.
Well, certainly in an engineering license, it can be lost. And that, are the ASCE News still will put that out there, with some cases about that have gone through, at least by losing membership in the society. And every state, at least where I'm licensed, will publish a list of who no longer has their license or what other less than license losing fines there are. Most of them do come down to unethical business practices. I think part of it still is that, women don't report. It's difficult to report because of the potential for retribution. Unless you've got a strong HR behind you, and and that's in a smaller firm, that's almost hard to get.
So there's,
and if you're on your own, you don't have HR. Yeah.
Right.
Pluses and minuses of doing part-time work if you're, in that time period where you're raising children. This is not a get-rich scheme, This is a way to keep yourself professionally tuned and in touch. But if you go back to the workforce full-time, that is beneficial to have, but there are certain pitfalls.
Yeah. I mean, I had some great projects with on the water energy nexus with the U.S. Department of Energy, and the Aquifer Storage Recovery Forum I did for National Academy of Sciences. 26 states, 3 federal agencies. Real things that really made a difference. But other people got the money, and I did the work. So it's how do you you want to stay in there, you want to stay relevant, you want to keep building your portfolio, but if the big organizations get the $500,000 and then offer you $5,000 to organize a conference that they got $500,000 for, it's like, and they use it for overhead and things like that. So it's something for women to think about as they're looking at this Great Resignation. And yes, it's easier when you have online methods. You can put together your own website. You don't need to have an office. You can, have online contracts set up and have online marketing and online meetings and all that kind of stuff. It's definitely a lot easier now than it used to be. But these are some of the little hidden things I think that people might not realize, that once you lose the name of the big company on your business card, it can be tough to be out there on your own.
If you are elected to do part-time work, there are a lot more firms that are interested in maintaining employees part-time, okay, than perhaps 20 years ago. There's a lot more flexibility in work arrangements, particularly because we certainly have a drop in the workforce where we don't have as many qualified people, and that good experience, we don't want to lose that. It's oftentimes not an option of you work full time and you have to be at the office, or you don't work for us. There's a lot of things, and I think sometimes women are timid to ask because they don't want to look like they can't play, the full throttle here. But everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but people in general are getting a better feeling for work-life balance, and it's and more respect for people who say, hey, I still want to do this, but I want to work, this many hours a week. Can we accommodate this so that I can still be used where needed, and so forth, and then still have that company's name and HR department and so forth. And it's a lot more prevalent now than it was 20, 30 years ago. And people shouldn't be shy about asking, because your employer isn't necessarily going to know that, that you're thinking strongly about, well, maybe I really need to not be working now, or maybe, what should I do here? And, negotiating that, you may find a much more pleasant situation than you might be expecting. So we have lots at our firm. We have lots of part-time employees. Not the same as like if you had field personnel that only worked part-time. This is professionals who for whatever their home reason is, whether it's caring for an elderly parent or a child with special needs or some such thing, that we accommodate because their contribution is so important. And it shouldn't make a difference to us if we only have them for 30 hours or 40 hours, if it makes that whole arrangement possible.
And I was going to say, we do see some women who want to go out and hang out their own shingle or start their own firm, and I would certainly not discourage it. I think they should explore all of the options, because when you start getting into engineering, you start talking about engineering liability insurance and having to stamp plans. There could be a way that what Marge is describing might actually better fit somebody's desire. I mean, there are certainly very, very good women. I can think of Karen Cabas and others that are running a very successful engineering firm in the Chicago area. And Cabas Engineering is Karen Cabas. And, in addition to whoever, who else she has working for her. But these, they're probably your fewer part of it is because of, particularly now as we get into the cost of insurance is incredibly high. And so, there are a lot of things that people have to think about. And for some women, it's been, well, I don't want to be doing the full time, or I don't want to have to be in the office 9 to 6, 8 to 6, 5 days a week, plus every other Saturday. But they like a different flexibility arrangement. They're thinking, well, if I'm just strike out with my own shingle, I can get that flexibility that I need in my life. Whereas they might be, if they can talk to a company, they can work something out. And then there are others who do want to do it and will do something like use ASCE. Now, I don't know what Karen does, but some of the smaller ones will use ASCE and their ability to get group insurance to minimize some of those costs. But the liability tied to engineering certainly probably also has an influence on people's decisions to strike out, male and female.
Right.
That's
So
a
you
really
know,
good
there's
point.
insurance in terms of liability insurance, but then you also have health insurance. And if you're not on a spouse's health insurance, you know, women's insurance can go increase very quickly into their 40s and 50s still. And that can provide a disincentive for companies to hire women.
I've never run across that.
I've heard that before, you know, with you know, especially with smaller organizations, that you know the insurance is going to be higher. You know, I would hope that it wouldn't be, but you know, and then if you're part time, you know, do you get health insurance still?
Oh, yep, yeah, likely not, likely not. So those are all things that people have to weigh, you know. But there's not to be discouraged. There's so many different options, and there's way more than there used to be. So
Right.
we just explore them and talk and you know, talk to people about what their experiences are like we're talking now. Because you might be surprised at all the different alternatives.
Right.
And we do have that one advantage, I will say, by being members of ASCE. You know, if we were to, and again, I'm working for a university, I'm very happily working for a university. I'm not going to leave the educational side of it because that's what I really enjoy. But many of these larger associations have created group health plans or group other plans, and those connections to negotiate down prices for life insurance, for health insurance, and things like that, where you can tie in, or they've got that kind of support. And so it's part of the, you know, it's part of that community. So it is, but they are in the US, health insurance has to be a decision. And my personal opinion is that the fact that health insurance is often tied to employment is actually discouraging entrepreneurship in this country.
Absolutely
And
discouraging entrepreneurship.
that has nothing to do with
innovation.
what gender you are. That's across the board.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've got a friend of mine that changed from one
Yeah.
university to another one and had to ration insulin for the time over the summer. For the time that, you know, she had about 6 weeks where she was basically uninsured, even though she got a catastrophe type policy. But she was rationing insulin as a diabetic because, you know, you couldn't get too far. You couldn't stockpile it. You know, like you couldn't get ahead on the prescription and have some extra. Right. And then she was going to be, for the time that her insurance ended with us in June, at the time she picked up her insurance in late August with the new university. You know, and those are those kind of things that have to come in. Health insurance in the US, again, I still think I'll argue with my faces with it. It is a stifler of innovation.
Absolutely agree. Well, and in some cases, that is all the more reason why someone may want to return to work at a larger organization, you know, as later on. And, you know, if we can create more opportunities for these returnships, and, you know, and I put in applications for things that were, you know, kind of more mid-level, and then people said, oh, you'd be bored. Oh, you wouldn't want this. You're a PhD. You wouldn't want this. You're an engineer. You wouldn't want this. And it's like, that's to me to decide. If I want to, you know, if I can be back as part of a team, if I can be working on, you know, larger, more significant projects because I'm with a larger organization that can have a greater impact, if I am, you know, able to have some basic health insurance, it might make, you know, might be willing to, you know, come in not at the level that I would had I continued through my career, you know, in a straight line.
Well, we've had people join our firm at more of a technician level that were overqualified for those positions because those were the only positions available at the time. And then, you know, their abilities, you know, shown, and they've, you know, progressed up through the ranks, and that initial position is just, you know, a far gone memory, you know.
first.
Yeah, it's okay to do that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And for whether it's the HR folks or the hiring manager or the intermediary committee, somebody along the lines, if somebody is introducing some kind of bias that says they wouldn't want this position because the person making that decision has worked all the way through and they're like, I'm earning this much. I can't imagine someone my age wanting to earn this much or wanting to come in at this level. And it's like, well, if somebody put through all the effort to put together an application to show up for, a series of interviews, clearly they're interested. There are other benefits of being part of a great organization.
Yeah, you're reminding me of an interview group that I was on about 6 weeks ago, where that question had been asked by several committee members. It's like, why, if they're here in this position, would they want to come back to academics in an entry-level academic position? It's like, because some of us have chosen we'd like to teach, and just like, we're all academics, but the idea of being a mid-career professional coming in was a little bit on the alien side. So it is a case across the board of many of us. And we all have inherent biases, so checking our biases at the door.
Yeah. Because like you said, we have some serious problems that need to be taken care of in this industry. We have, we're dealing with climate change, aging infrastructure, emerging contaminants, PFAS, equity issues. There's so many issues to be dealt with, crisis response. And we need every voice. We need everyone to be a part of it. We need to create more ways for people to get back into the career, whether you want to call it a pipeline or a non-linear career path, whatever, a jungle gym, someone called it today. But just give people a chance to get back in. Don't just say no just because you can't imagine you being, taking a position at that level at your age or at your level of experience or whatever. If they've applied, give them the benefit of the doubt that they are actually interested in being there and that it's not, and they're even less likely to see it as like a stepping stone position than someone younger who's working their way up, right? That they've had a chance to think about, yes, I want to be part of a larger organization. I want to be part of a team. I want to be part of a mission-driven organization that is doing great things in the world. And, just because it's always been held by younger people, that shouldn't be an impediment.
Well, and it's interesting when Shirley, you said you're looking at these resumes and the group had these certain questions. It seems like the person who's submitting that should understand, oh, people are reading this are going to have those kinds of questions. How can I be proactive about addressing this? And maybe the days of the cover letter are gone because we're submitting something online that has to fit some sort of form. But if there's a way to address that proactively, because you don't know if you're going to get the opportunity in an interview to be able to explain that particular approach or not, or why you're doing that, and answer those questions.
Yeah, so, this person actually did try to do that, and it still came up. It was interesting because it was a preconceived bias of somebody with multiple patents in a specific area of STEM, when to come back and be a teaching professor at a college.
Because she would enjoy it,
That's exactly what the candidate said. So
right, absolutely.
So this is, so I think we have to be aware that and the committee is very diverse, but still there's everybody in the committee, had a certain set of glasses on, a certain set of lenses on.
Yeah. That's looking at age diversity, and not just that we have 5 different generations in the workplace and that level of diversity, but also considering that you may have people in a position that is not usually associated with that age cohort.
Absolutely.
You're like, oh,
Yeah. So Shirley, do you have
So-
professors of practice at your institution?
Do I have one?
Professors of practice at your institution? Yeah.
Yeah, we actually call their assistant or associate or full teaching professors. So some of the main campus, University Park, does have professors of practice as a title. We don't have many of them on our campus. Those are typically industry people who come back in. This was somebody who wanted to come on the tenure track.
Ooh, that's
And
unusual.
No, it is unusual, but still to me, as I was, my discussion was, because just because it's unusual does not mean that it's not sincere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely. They had to be very interesting interview discussions, but
It was also a very interesting interview. So
Yeah.
So we did interview the candidate, but it was a very interesting, thought process going through it, and getting in addition to a written statement of teaching, and that where that was addressed, was also having the explanation being heard like we're doing now over Zoom, because that's how the world works, is we're all on Zoom.
right, how the world works now, for sure. But
yeah.
But I
think that to wait until you get to an interview before you address those questions, and not like try to second guess what everyone else is going to think before, just in the cover letter, right?
Well, the beauty
So,
is
usually
academic
March-
jobs still want a cover letter. That's the good part.
Yeah.
In fact, we've been told on some of our higher level positions, if they don't have a cover letter, we're not looking at them. And I'm glad to
Yeah.
see it, because again, in there, it does allow, I think that's what we've gotten away from, unfortunately, with the machine learning, or, HR sorting on keywords, has been, there are some fascinating stories out there by people who are applying for these jobs who have something to bring to the table that is not as conventional, or have some way they got there that shows some grit and determination, that is not, that they won't be picked up by the HR software, and unless the HR software picks up the keywords that the company was looking for also.
Right.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
And that's
and
what
we
I tell my
actually
students. Networking is still critical. It is absolutely still critical, because even if you apply to the HR software, if you know someone, you can have that resume pulled out.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have to have both. And actually we're going to have we have a woman on the summit, Portia Ingram, who is an expert on, part of a career coaching program for women that, that teaches you how to, call out those keywords up top, call out some, key accomplishments, career highlights, above the fold on the first page. Yes, people don't have to go hunting through your resume for it, and then go into the, more of the chronological layout that people are more accustomed to seeing. But to have that stuff, like, just don't, because you've got such a short amount of time to really get someone's attention. And certainly if there's the automated software, and then on top of that, you got, during COVID, looking for jobs and trying to network, you can't just catch up with people in the hall when they just finished giving a presentation and say, hey, I just want to introduce myself. You can't do that on Zoom. You don't have that option, right?
Yeah.
And so now that we're getting back to live events, to practice that.
So, but something that just struck me that's kind of interesting was that the American Academy of Water Resource Engineers just recently did a free webinar on how to interview virtually, because that's the way a lot of interviews are being done right now, and people don't really have that much training about, what's different about how you present yourself and so forth. And so that just seems like a very timely thing, and a good a power skill, as Shirley was referring to them as. but just very relevant because it's different now. Just like if you're giving a presentation in a room, it's different than giving a presentation, virtually, where like we're sitting in a chair, we don't get to walk around the room and make sure everybody is.
You want to hold the space. You want to take up the stage. I see that a lot, in church when young folks get up to speak, and they're used to having the mic right here, right, and they haven't learned how to project their voice so it fills the entire room, and it's just a practice thing, right?
So it's actually very interesting going back to the networking piece. During COVID, Penn State offered a chance for people to apply, women to apply to basically what's the title? It's basically creating women's future at Penn State. That's not the exact title, and I'd have to go back and look it up. But we're trying to get that mid-level group of women and some of the younger women who were looking at moving up. And moving up did not have to be what we call traditional administration. It could be running your own lab in your own center. It could be, thinking about department chair. It could just be being a better leader in your job. But it was run by next level leadership. And there were several exercises in there that were very interesting, particularly for some of the younger faculty, the newer faculty, because again, there were several on networking and trying to draw out your network and watching people start thinking about, how do you reach out for talking to somebody who's 2 steps away, but that you would like to get to know, and how do you do that partly in a virtual environment, but just overall. It's like, well, somebody who knows that person, so you can work your way through that introductory piece. And that's how, we think about creating those networks. And then that networking is what helps get there. I've told students before, particularly ones who are looking to move out of state, but I've done it here locally too. Students like, well, I really would like to move to this part of the country. It's like, well, have you given any thought to that? It's like, I've got names. Again, if we isolate down, I can probably come up with people who would be willing to talk to you for a few minutes, either about positions in their firm if they exist, or about other potential, some of the issues that are going on out there, things you could speak to that could take a East Coast education in a water-rich area of the country into a more drought-stricken area, something like that. Just that transferability, because they'd like to go, but they just short of basically cold applying, and sometimes cold applying doesn't work when a company sees an out-of-state address that's that far away. Wanting to make that transition.
Yeah. And how important it is to understand how to connect someone. And I do this for people all the time. I've got all these connections, and it's so easy, with LinkedIn and stuff, to look at your however many thousand connections you have, and then sort by state, sort by company name, sort by who do I know at such and such, and find somebody well enough to, see if they'll put you in touch with someone, or at least give you some background insight into the position and what they're really looking for. I heard about this. They're really looking for this, or they're looking to promote within, or they're, whatever. That is really great intel when you're applying. So, and making sure that if you are connecting someone, for those of you who are referring someone, make sure that you actually write a short email or group text to the other person, not just telling your student or whatever, go, contact them, because they can contact anyone. Anyone could look up their names or whatever, but to have an actual referral, it used to be, you could say, Shirley Clark recommended that I reach out to you. And that's helpful, but how much better is to have Shirley Clark write an email, or a text to both me and this other person, say, oh, I really thought the two of you should connect. That's powerful.
That's what I end up doing, because I also know that sometimes when we all sort email, we sort by the sender. Yeah. And again, we talk about, I'm sure everybody here on this call gets 150 to 200 emails a day. And when you start getting that, you start scrolling through, triaging first. And triaging often means opening up an email from a name you recognize if the subject line also will kick attention. And so that will be, that's where and I do write plenty of those emails as a faculty. that are
Right.
those introductory emails that introduce a student to someone else, because I do know that
Mhm.
my email will get open.
Mhm.
Whereas the other one, and the person may not be intending to be rude
No.
about it, but there's like, I'll get to it later this week. Well, oh gee, I didn't get through all of them. I'll get to it next week, and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, yeah, and then we get there.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I know we could probably,
really-
sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying that's perfect advice for a way you can really help somebody instead of having the same intent, but it's not as effective when you ask them to email them. You know, you're following through on that linkage to make it as effective as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know we could probably keep talking about this all night because we've all been around for a while. Do you guys have anything you'd like to mention to folks about resources within ASCE and EWRI, particularly related to women?
Shirley, do you want to do the Women Water Nexus?
Sure, I could do that. As I say, again, I will say that, for engineering, EWRI does have quite a few women, and we are seeing many more younger women coming up in the organization. One of the initiatives that many of our younger female women brought forward was we have technical councils underneath our institute, and one of them went through the International Council, is the Women Water Nexus, because they're two really, what I'd say, driving foci in there. One would be promoting young women engineers, young women water professionals, or environmental professionals. I'll broaden it back out since we do take in members that are not necessarily engineers, and encourage that. One of our past presidents is a non-engineer, so it's not like you're kind of stuck in a closet off to the side or back row if you're not an engineer. You are you can choose to be a very active member. So one of them is to promote that part of it. And an example would be a New Year's right after New Year's, we had an International Perspectives on Water and the Environment conference in Dhaka, Bangladesh, which is where I was, and then we were doing some hybrid sessions, and Marge was actually hosting from Reston, Virginia, so I was hosting from Bangladesh. And over there, we met several very, very good young women faculty at a couple of the universities in Dhaka, as well as strong female and male students over there as they're working on basically some very large. Bangladesh is on the front line of climate change. So they would like to promote those women and what they're doing to raise awareness of what they're doing. We actually encourage several of them to apply for our visiting international fellows, where we'll help support their attendance at our annual conference and be recognized as part of that. It'll give them also a stature and recognition. In addition to the other thing they're very interested in, the Water Women Nexus group, is keeping that linkage between water and women, and particularly water, women, and food at that forefront of a lot of our discussions, because we certainly do know in many respects that in many countries, particularly ones that do not have water delivered to the house, women are responsible for obtaining the water for the family. And that can definitely affect education. It can affect other ways of measuring attainment and stability of the household, particularly, in many countries where the man may be doing a dangerous job and may not survive. And, you see a lot of widows that have young children and have to get water and all of that. Again, we see that stunted education. So they're really promoting, and they put together a policy piece they're proposing to the Institute and to EWRI to create a policy that says that, particularly as our policies allow our lobbyists to go talk to Congress. If there's a policy out there that says that this should be an important consideration, for example, for USAID or other governmental agencies that work internationally as part of what the US considers good relationships with other countries, that women in water should be at the forefront of that. So in addition to that, in addition to things like a new professional symposium that is not women focused, but tries to provide those power skills, and a lot of those power skills that they're teaching about, in addition to technical skills, are ones that we know that women would benefit for. All young professionals will, but a lot of times women don't get those power skills as quickly and don't introduce power skills as quickly as men can in the profession. So that would be kind of that heads up. So I don't know, Marge, what you would like to add on top of that?
I think you did a phenomenal job covering that. I appreciate you.
Yeah,
You hit
yeah.
more than I expected. You exceeded
Yeah.
expectations.
And I will say, I started going to a number of the Women Water Nexus sessions. I've been to a few of their meetings, and and they really, they're very active. They have a lot going on, welcoming new members. They've got, book club. They've got, international projects. They've got presentations at conferences and special sessions that they're, and receptions and whatnot that they're putting together, and ways to really try to grow this Women Water Nexus. And in a very, we've actually talked to a number of organizations within this summit with things like Women in Water, WOMXN, Her2O. There's a few of them out there, and this one has, I think, has a little more of a professional presentation focus, and having their own sessions, and really promoting women as thought leaders, as well as not just networking and support kind of things, and book club kind of things. So it's a good group. I'd highly recommend, if you're interested, check out the Women Water Nexus, and we can certainly on the page where this video is going to play, we can certainly have links to various programs that are available. So any links you want to have, we'll be able to add that to the page. And of course, this summit is playing during UN Water, the first UN Water in about 50 years, and or almost 50 years. And when we are going to be talking a lot about, and there's been a pattern over the years of whether they're talking more about women and water, and impacts on women from various decisions related to water, and gender parity in water. And both of those are going to be discussed quite heavily during UN Water Week. So while you are watching this, I will be up in New York City. I'll be checking on all the comments and everything, and our guests will also be able to check on any comments. So if you have any questions, comments, observations, experience of your own that you'd like to share, go ahead and put those in the chat, and Shirley and Marge and me and my team will be able to follow up with you there. And so thanks guys so much for coming out. Really appreciate making this happen. And any final thoughts for our audience on what the future is for women in water and in all levels in their career?
It's bright. I'm just going to say it's bright. I mean, we need people, and we need to figure out how to make sure that women, as well as men, minorities, others that don't always feel like they fit in and make it through if this is what they want to do. It's bright. The positions are there.
Yeah, positions are there. Need their perspectives. I think it's just a great, bright future, and lots of opportunities to make a difference in the world, in the water professions. It's a good thing.
And the career growth opportunities and the options to do a non-conventional path are also there, as you're looking at, I'm trying to go back and figure out what our past president's female, Marge is president, I'm president-elect, and the vice president is female. Mm-hmm. So all of the elected leadership positions across a 5-year span will be female. So there are organizations, there are companies, there are universities where you will be treated as valuable, as a valued member and contributor to this profession.
You can flourish and grow. So maintain that optimism. And both Shirley and I just want to thank you for getting to share our optimism and joining on this interview today.
Thank you.
look
Yes,
forward
yes.
to.
And and hopefully anything that we brought up is is less about being negative and more about just raising awareness of what's out there, and just what are the opportunities to make it an even better profession for all of us. So well, on that note, thanks everyone for coming out, and keep coming back for all of our sessions here at the Women of Water Get Real virtual summit. We'll see you again soon. Thanks so much for joining us for this extraordinary conversation, one of 45 extraordinary conversations we had as part of the Women of Water Get Real virtual summit, where we explored where and why women are leaking from the water career pipeline, how we can stop those leaks, and even bring women back to water. I hope that you will enjoy all of these amazing interviews. If you don't have a chance to watch all of them during the summit, you have the opportunity to join us with a power pack and get lifetime access to all the videos, as well as an opportunity to join us for 30 days in a brand new community where we will dig even deeper in live facilitated conversations about some of the issues that are facing women in water. Look forward to seeing you there. Please join us at watercitizen.org/women, watercitizen.org/women for more information. See you again soon.